Hey guys, it's Austin here with Out Jeeping. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to do a disc brake replacement. Now today, I'm going to be doing it on my Jeep Cherokee behind me, but it's pretty much going to be similar for all disc brake vehicles. It might just be a little bit different when coming to the pads part, but it should be pretty straightforward. I'm going to show you guys some tips and tricks to help you guys with your project. So let's get started. So I'm going to start off by jacking up the axle on the front passenger side because we're going to start off with this brake up here first. Now if you do have a front wheel drive, you're going to want to make sure that you block off the tires so that way it doesn't roll anywhere. But this is just stuck in two-wheel drive and the rear tires are still on the ground, so I shouldn't have to worry about it moving anywhere. Now if you don't have an impact gun, you're going to want to make sure you crack all these lug nuts free when the tire is still on the ground before you jack it up. But since I got an impact gun, I'm just going to zip these off real quick. Alright, so now with that wheel off, we can see that our brake is right here, and with this style caliper, we basically just have a caliper to take off the pads. On some other vehicles, they're going to have an external bracket that the pads ride on that you may have to take off also. But this is pretty straightforward. We just have two bolts in the back of the caliper, and depending if you replace your caliper or if they're the original factory ones, it'll depend on the size bolts. I think for just the factory ones, they're 13 millimeter, but I replaced these calipers about last fall, and the ones back here are going to be a 12 millimeter. So I'm going to start off with taking these bolts out. Now if you can't pull out this caliper, if it's too tight, well, this one is pretty easy. You can always take a pry bar or a screwdriver just to wedge it in here, just to give you a little bit of leverage to break it free. So now with this off, I'm just going to set it to the side, probably right on this control arm, so that way it's not dangling on the brake line, because you don't want that to get damaged at all. But now our rotor should be able to come off. Just like so. And then looking back at our caliper, our two pads basically just snap right into the caliper. There's one that's going to be snapping into the piston, and then one that has this little spring clamp that's on the other side. So if this, all we gotta do is just push down, and then it just pops out like that, and then push this down, and that pops out that one. Now like I was saying before, this is a pretty much brand new caliper, and as you can see, the guide pins move back freely. But if yours don't, now is a good time to do that, because if you don't have good sliding guide pins, you're going to have problems wearing on your new pads, and you don't want that. Alright, so for a quick demonstration on how to re-grease these guys up, basically we can take our guide pin, keep pushing so that it pops out of this rubber boot, and then we can pull it out entirely just like that. And now what I like to do is take out the boot from inside the caliper, and you want to break off that surface right in there, because a lot of rust likes to bond to that rubber just a little bit, but you want to be careful that you don't poke any holes. So we're going to break it up like that, and then you can push it out like so. So what I basically do is just take this, and you can basically clean it any way you want. Make sure you degrease it. What I do sometimes is just basically take it to the mudroom sink and take some dish soap and clean the inside and out and make it look nice and new again. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back. Alright, so now with this boot all cleaned up, I'm going to go and reinstall it back into the caliper. And to do so, you can use a little bit of lubrication to help you guide into place. And the lube you want to use is basically brake parts lubricant. Basically this withstands a lot of that heat that comes off the brakes, and if you were to use regular grease, it would just either burn up or turn into a really liquid, and it basically wouldn't last long, and you would have seized guide pins again. So you don't want that, because you want your brakes working as long as possible without having this fail on you. So I'm going to stick this into the hole. And then we can take our caliper guide pin, and if it did have any rust or pitting on it, you can get away with using a wire wheel and make sure that surface is nice and clean, because you don't want any resistance on there, because you want this moving back and forth as freely as possible. So I'm going to use some grease on here, and you're going to want to make sure you get some inside the boot too. This stuff is orange in color. and then we can just set it right in. Alright, as you can see, it moves back and forth nicely, and that's what you want. So before we start putting the new pads and rotors on, I want to make sure that this surface down here and up here is nice and clean. Because if it's nice and clean, our pads should be able to move back and forth freely without any obstruction. That way they should be working properly. Now with the pads I got today, they're going to be AC Delco ceramic pads, and they did come with this caliper abutment service clip. But what these basically do is go on the ends of the pads, and they help prevent any wear onto this knuckle. So I'm going to start off by getting this clean. I'm just going to take a wire wheel and clean that off, and then we should be able to install our pads. Alright, so with that surface all cleaned off, I'm going to take our pads, and as you can see, there is a little bit of room in there, so we're going to take our caliper abutment service clips, and they come with different sizes. They come with the 10 thousandths, 15 thousandths, 20 thousandths, and 25 thousandths. So you'll have to do some mix and matching to see what works best for you and what type of clearances you have. You don't want to make sure it's too tight, because otherwise your pad won't be able to move back and forth, but you just want a little resistance and that it moves back and forth nicely without any slop in there. Alright, so I went and got the shims figured out for my case, and I'm going with a 10 thousandths on one and a 15 thousandths on the other, just because on the inside there is a little bit of a divot that was from previous wear, so that extra little bit is getting taken up with the shim. And with these shims, basically it's going to be only on one side, which is the bottom side over here, and they clip in really nicely, so that way they're not coming out. If you were to put them on both sides, it would be absolutely too tight. Want to be able to move back and forth freely. So they give you 4 packs with those 4 different sized shims, and basically you have enough in case you were to use the same shim on all 4 pads. So now that I got our pads figured out with the correct clearance, I'm going to take the caliper and retract the piston in a little bit more. And what this does is basically helped us fit on the new pads over the new rotor. That way it's not going to be tight when we put it on. And to do this, basically I'm just going to take a C-clamp and put it in here on the other side, and it should go in nicely. And before we start doing this, you're going to want to make sure to pop the hood and pop off the cap on your master cylinder reservoir. That way the air in the reservoir can escape efficiently and you won't have any problems. One thing you never want to do is top off your brake fluid to the brim, because what happens is when you're doing this, if you already topped it off, you're going to have extra brake fluid flowing out, because it's going to be less fluid that's stuck inside the caliper and going back to the master cylinder. Because as the pads wear, the piston is going to come out even further and further, and there's going to be more fluid in the caliper than there is the reservoir, so that's why the reservoir goes down slightly. But obviously if you have really low brake fluid inside your reservoir, you're going to want to put some in there. You don't want to be running at dangerous low levels at all. Now, some other common issues you may encounter with calipers, besides having seized up guide pins, is by having a seized up piston. And basically this happens when the seal inside just gets so old that it won't retract the piston properly, and it'll just stay pushed out all the way. And what this causes is basically the pads to keep wearing after you release the brakes, and it could cause excessive heat, causing your brakes to smoke and get really hot. Another similar problem could actually be caused by the soft line up here. These can actually collapse when they get old, and basically it does the same thing. It'll collapse and keep the pressure over here inside the caliper, and it won't be able to retract after you release the brakes. And as you keep driving, it'll get really hot and you might have smoking brakes again. So now I'm going to stick the C-clamp right in here and start to tighten up. Alright, so right there, that's where our piston is bottomed out. Another thing I want to mention real quick since you're in here is take a look at the dust boot that goes around the piston, and you want to make sure that there's no tears in there, because if there's tears, obviously debris or water can get in there and cause corrosion, causing that piston to stick. It's especially crucial that you take a look at that if you have steel pistons. Now on here, these are just basically ceramic pistons, and we don't have to worry about that too much, but it could still corrode with the outside housing of the caliper. Since these are new, these are obviously well in shape. So now we can take our new pads and push them into place. We're going to start off with the one that goes to the piston. Pop them in just like that. And now for this side, line it up like that, and they got these two little holes that are going to pop into there, and then we got this band spring that should hold it into place. Just like that. And before we put everything back on the knuckle, I am going to be putting some anti-seize on the surface right here. That way we shouldn't have any rust buildup causing any sticking problems. You could also use like grease if you want to. But anti-seize works just fine, and I've used it a lot of times before. Alright, so before we put our new rotors in, we're going to want to make sure we get this all clean, because the brand new ones come with a little bit of oil on them. That way they don't rust while shipping and in storage. So I'm just going to take a little bit of brake clean, and then take some paper towel and clean off that surface. So now I'm going to slide on our new rotor. And then we can take our caliper. Make sure these guide pins are all the way back so they're not in the way. And then we'll clip it in on the bottom. Pop it in just like that. And then we can take our caliper bolts. I already have some anti-seize on here, but you can put some on if you want, just so the next time when you do your brake job, they'll come out nicely. Alright, that's pretty much it for the calipers. Now on the other side, it's basically just going to be a mirror image of this side. But that's pretty much it. I'm going to throw on the tire, and then we should be done. And one thing you want to do before you go and drive it is just to pump the brakes to get that extra space out between the rotor and the caliper. Since we did retract that piston all the way, we want to make sure it's back into its proper spot. That way you shouldn't have any issues when you start braking the first time. Alright guys, that's going to do for today's video. As you can see, it's a pretty easy job to do. Anyone in their own garage can pretty much do it. And I bought these on Amazon and only paid like 60-65 bucks for, new rotors and ceramic pads. So I'll leave a link in the description below on where you can find them yourself. So I hope you guys learned something. Make sure to like and subscribe to the OutGB YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or comments, post them below. And I'll see you guys in the next video.